In this video, we'll explore how the dollar became dominant global currency, the pros and cons of de-dollarization, its potential impact on the global economy, and how policies from both the Trump and Biden administrations have contributed to the future of the US dollar. Dollarization is the process of a country adopting the US dollar as its official currency. This means that the country's own currency is replaced by the US dollar in all its transactions, both domestically and internationally. On the other hand, de-dollarization is the process of a country moving away from the US dollar as its official currency. In other words, it involves replacing the US dollar with the country's own currency or another foreign currency. During the 1990s and early 2000s, many countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia adopted the US dollar as their official currency due to hyperinflation, unstable currencies, and economic instability. However, over time, many of the countries dependent on the dollar faced challenges such as a loss of monetary policy control, high borrowing costs, and exposure to external shocks. To begin with, the use of the US dollar as an international currency can be traced back to the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, which established a new international monetary system and created the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. The need for the Bretton Woods Agreement was urgent for other countries because the global economy had been severely disrupted by World War II and there was a need to establish a new system to promote economic stability and growth. In Europe, there were mixed reactions to the Bretton Woods Agreement. The United Kingdom, which played a key role in the negotiations, initially welcomed the agreement, as it provided a stable exchange rate system that would help support international trade. However, as the UK's economic position deteriorated in the post-war period, it became more critical of the agreement and the fixed exchange rate system. The main opponent to the Bretton Woods Agreement was France, which argued that the US dollar was overvalued and that the system would benefit the United States at the expense of other countries. France also believed that the system would not provide sufficient safeguards against inflation and speculative attacks on currencies. Another vocal opponent of the agreement was the Soviet Union, which refused to participate in the negotiations and ultimately declined to sign the agreement. The Soviet Union instead chose to pursue its own economic system, based on central planning and state ownership of industry. China did not participate in the Bretton Woods negotiations, as it was not yet recognized as a sovereign state by many countries. However, the Chinese government expressed its support for the agreement and later became a member of the IMF and the World Bank in 1945. Despite these objections, the Bretton Woods Agreement was ultimately adopted and played a significant role in shaping the post-war global economy. The Bretton Woods Agreement was signed on July 22, 1944, by representatives of 44 countries who met at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, USA. The system created a new framework for international trade and finance, using the US dollar as the world's reserve currency and the gold standard. Following the agreement, the US dollar became the dominant global reserve currency, supported by the growth of the US economy, its political and military power, and the strength of the dollar in international transactions. However, the Vietnam War strained the system due to the increased printing of money to finance it, which led to inflation and eroded the value of the dollar. Other countries also began to doubt the US's ability to maintain the value of the dollar and started exchanging their dollars for gold, which put pressure on US gold reserves. Furthermore, alternative currencies, such as the euro and Chinese yuan, have contributed to this shift away from the US dollar as the dominant global reserve currency. Ultimately in 1971, US President Richard Nixon announced that the US would no longer exchange dollars for gold at the fixed rate, effectively ending the gold standard and the Bretton Woods system. Interestingly, the World Gold Council reports that the United States has the largest gold reserves in the world, with approximately 8,134 tons of gold as of 2023. Following the United States, Germany and Italy are also major holders of gold, with roughly 3,364 tons and 2,451 tons, respectively. Other countries with substantial gold reserves include France with 2,436 tons, Russia with 2,299 tons, China with 1,948 tons, Switzerland with 1,040 tons, Japan with 846 tons, India with 754 tons, and the Netherlands with 612 tons. Today, the gold standard is no longer used by any country as a basis for their monetary system. The Bretton Woods Agreement established institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank, which continue to play crucial roles in global economic governance. Currently, many countries are considering de-dollarization as a way to regain control over their monetary policy, reduce borrowing costs, and avoid exposure to external shocks such as changes in the U.S. economy, interest rates, exchange rates, and reduce vulnerability from U.S. sanctions. When a country adopts the US dollar, it gives up control over its currency and monetary policy to the US Federal Reserve, limiting its ability to adjust interest rates or exchange rates to respond to domestic economic conditions. De-dollarization also has the added benefit of making a country's exports more affordable, thus increasing its competitiveness in the international market. On the other hand, dollarization can provide a stable and reliable currency, which reduces inflation and exchange rate instability. This stability can lead to increased foreign investment and economic growth. Furthermore, the U.S. may see de-dollarization as a threat to its global influence and may take steps to counteract it, such as imposing economic sanctions or restricting access to U.S. financial markets. This could lead to increased tensions and a breakdown in trade relations between countries. In addition, if these countries were to shift away from the U.S. dollar, it could lead to a significant devaluation of the currency and a destabilization of global financial markets. Now let's talk about the impact of international organizations on the dollar. International organizations like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank have been promoting de-dollarization to reduce risks associated with external shocks and support the development of local currency bond markets. The IMF provides technical assistance to countries to develop their own currency and diversify their currencies, including establishing central banks, implementing monetary policies, and developing financial infrastructure. The World Bank has been supporting the development of local currency bond markets through initiatives such as the Global Bond Market Development Program and providing assistance in areas such as foreign exchange risk management. Similarly, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, has also been promoting the use of local currencies in trade and investment in the Asia-Pacific region. These efforts by international organizations can help countries establish a more independent monetary policy, reduce borrowing costs, and increase their competitiveness in the international market. While there have been some successes in international de-dollarization efforts, there are also several challenges that need to be addressed. Firstly, they need to work with governments to improve their monetary policy and fiscal management, promoting transparency and accountability to build trust in local currencies. Secondly, international organizations can play a crucial role in promoting de-dollarization. They can support the use of alternative currencies like the euro or the yuan, and facilitate the development of regional currency blocks. For instance, the Eurozone is a regional currency bloc where multiple European Union member states have adopted the euro as their common currency. By taking these actions, international organizations can help countries overcome the challenges of dollarization, promote de-dollarization, and establish a more stable and independent financial system. Now, let's look at case studies of successful de-dollarization efforts. In recent years, several countries have successfully implemented de-dollarization policies, leading to increased economic stability and improved access to credit for their citizens. One such country is Ecuador, which began a process of de-dollarization in 2015 after experiencing a prolonged period of currency appreciation and inflation. The government introduced a new currency, the sucre, which was pegged to the US dollar at a ratio of 25:1. This allowed for greater monetary independence and helped to stabilize the economy. Iran is also a country that has implemented de-dollarization policies with some success. In 2018, the government introduced a new currency, the taman, to replace the rial, which had been heavily devalued due to U.S. sanctions. The move helped to stabilize the economy and reduce inflation, although the country still faces significant challenges due to ongoing sanctions. It is worth mentioning that Iran has been facing U.S. sanctions since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, which overthrew the U.S.-backed monarchy and established an Islamic republic. The U.S. has imposed various economic, trade, and financial sanctions on Iran over the years, citing concerns about Iran's nuclear program, its alleged support for terrorism, and its human rights record. The sanctions have been enforced to varying degrees by successive U.S. administrations, with the most severe measures being imposed under the Trump administration in 2018, when the U.S. withdrew from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions on Iran's oil and banking sectors. Another country that has successfully implemented de-dollarization policies is Zimbabwe. In 2019, the Zimbabwe introduced a new currency, the RTGS dollar, and banned the use of foreign currencies for domestic transactions. Since then, the economy has shown signs of improvement, with inflation falling and the country's fiscal position improving. Zimbabwe too has been under U.S. sanctions since the early 2000s. The sanctions were imposed in response to the country's land reform program, which involved the seizure of white-owned farms and their redistribution to black Zimbabweans. The U.S., along with other Western countries, accused the Zimbabwean government of human rights abuses and undermining the rule of law in the country. The U.S. has maintained these sanctions even after the end of the Mugabe regime in 2017, citing concerns about the country's political and economic situation. India is another country that has implemented de-dollarization policies, although the process has been more gradual. This has helped to reduce the impact of currency fluctuations and improve the stability of the Indian economy. While some countries have successfully implemented de-dollarization policies, others have struggled to do so. One such country is Venezuela, which attempted to implement de-dollarization policies in 2018 in response to hyperinflation and economic instability. The government introduced a new currency, the sovereign bolivar, and pegged it to the petro, a digital currency backed by Venezuela's oil reserves. However, the move failed to stabilize the economy, and hyperinflation continued to soar. One reason for this failure was that the government continued to print money to finance its spending, leading to further inflation and economic instability. It bears mentioning that Venezuela also started facing U.S. sanctions in 2014, which intensified in 2017. The U.S. government imposed sanctions on Venezuela in response to what it saw as the erosion of democracy, human rights abuses, and corruption under the government of President Nicolás Maduro. The U.S. has also imposed sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry, which is a crucial source of revenue for the country, in an attempt to pressure the Maduro government to hold free and fair elections and to respect human rights. Another country that has struggled with de-dollarization is Argentina. The country has a long history of economic instability, and has attempted to implement de-dollarization policies at various times. In recent years, the country has experienced high inflation and a sharp devaluation of its currency, which has led to increased dependence on the US dollar. China too has been promoting the use of the yuan in international trade and investment, and has signed currency swap agreements with various countries. Similarly, Russia has been diversifying its foreign reserves away from the US dollar and increasing its gold reserves. It has also been exploring the use of cryptocurrencies as an alternative to the US dollar. It should be emphasized that the United States has imposed various sanctions on Russia since 2014, following Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine. The initial sanctions were imposed by the US, EU, and other countries in response to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Now let's explore the impacts of both the Trump and Biden administration policies on global dominance of the US dollar. The Trump administration pursued an America First policy, imposing tariffs on imports from countries such as China, which reduced the availability of dollars in foreign markets and strengthened the dollar. However, the administration's hostility to international institutions and inconsistent foreign policy had a counterproductive effect on the dollar's global dominance. The total economic stimulus expenditure by the Trump administration was approximately $2.4 trillion. This includes the CARES Act, which provided $2.2 trillion in economic relief in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2019, which provided $320 billion in spending increases and raised the debt ceiling. Additionally, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which was signed into law by Trump, included significant tax cuts for corporations and individuals. These plans were partially funded by debt issued by the U.S. Treasury, and the Federal Reserve also provided support through a variety of lending facilities. The Biden administration has proposed two major spending plans: the $3.5 trillion American Families Plan, AFP, which includes investments in infrastructure and social programs over 10 years, and the $2.7 trillion American Jobs Plan, AJP, which includes investments in infrastructure, job training, and clean energy over 8 years. Together, these plans would amount to $6.2 trillion in proposed spending over a period of 10 years. To fund these spending plans, the Biden administration plans to raise the corporate tax rate and increase taxes on high-income earners. However, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, CRFB, estimates that the Biden administration has already approved $4.8 trillion in new borrowing through various economic stimulus and relief packages. This means that while the administration is proposing to spend $6.2 trillion, it has already approved borrowing of $4.8 trillion. Experts argue that the policies of the Trump administration, particularly the tax cuts and deregulation, contributed to the strengthening of the U.S. dollar during his tenure. Additionally, the policies of the Biden administration, particularly the proposed infrastructure spending and economic stimulus, could lead to a weaker dollar in the long term. Additionally, the Biden administration's foreign policy towards Latin America may potentially hinder the dominance of the U.S. dollar in the region, as it focuses on strengthening partnerships with Latin American countries and organizations, reducing their economic and political dependence on the United States, and contributing to de-dollarization efforts in the region. While the Trump administration prioritized deregulation and tax cuts, while Biden administration prioritizes government investment in infrastructure and social programs. While the Trump administration's policies strengthen the dollar, the Biden administration's spending plans could lead to a weaker dollar in the long term. Additionally, the Biden administration's foreign policy towards Latin America may contribute to de-dollarization efforts in the region. The concept of de-dollarization is gaining momentum as more countries seek to reduce their dependence on the US dollar. With this being said, we want to hear from you. What is your take on the current de-dollarization trend? Do you believe it would be preferable for the world to pursue greater independence from the US, or do you have another perspective? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video on de-dollarization. If you found this information valuable, please don't hesitate to like and share. By subscribing to our channel, you'll gain access to more insightful content on global economics and finance. Your subscription is a great aid to us, and we appreciate it. Until the next one.